The Thames moves differently at 3 in the morning. In the hours between the last hansom cab and the first market cart, when fog rolls thick as wool across Blackfriars Bridge, the river seems to reverse its flow. Not visibly, not in any way you could measure with the instruments of 1888, but in some deeper current that moves beneath the surface, beneath the silt and centuries of accumulated history, beneath even the ancient gravel bed that London first grew upon. Stand here, on this exact spot where the bridge meets the embankment, and you might notice something the thousands who cross each day never see. The water creates patterns, spirals within spirals, geometric arrangements that hold for exactly 7 seconds before dissolving, only to reform 30 feet downstream in precisely the same configuration. Beautiful, impossible, and utterly unexplained. We tell ourselves we understand rivers. We measure their flow in cubic meters per second, chart their depths, predict their floods. The Thames has been studied more thoroughly than perhaps any waterway in human history. Engineers have straightened it, contained it, built upon it, tunneled beneath it. We have mapped every curve, every bank, every tributary from its source in the Cotswolds to its mouth at the North Sea. Yet the river keeps secrets. What if the London we think we know, the great Victorian capital, the heart of an empire upon which the sun never sets, what if it was built not upon the Thames, but within it? What if the river itself was not chosen by accident, but by design? And whose design? Romans, certainly, but they built upon foundations that already existed, following patterns they could sense but not see, patterns that may predate not just their civilization, but civilization itself. Tonight, we follow the river backward, not upstream, but back through time, through the layers of story and stone, through the official histories and into the mysteries that official histories prefer to forget. There's no danger here, only questions. Only the gentle, persistent wondering that comes when you look at something familiar long enough that it becomes strange again. The fog thickens. The gas lamps along the embankment create small amber worlds in the darkness, each one an island of certainty in an ocean of questions. Between them, in the places where light fails, the Thames whispers in a language older than English, older than Latin, older perhaps than language itself. Let's listen. Act 1. The Official Story. The story of Victorian London and its relationship with the Thames is, we're told, a story of conquest, of human ingenuity triumphing over nature, of civilization imposed upon chaos. In 1858, the Great Stink forced Parliament to abandon its sessions. The smell of the river, choked with sewage, waste, the effluvia of 4 million people, became unbearable even for politicians accustomed to ignoring unpleasant realities. Something had to be done. And so Joseph Bazalgette, chief engineer of the Metropolitan Board of Works, designed a solution that would become the backbone of modern London, a system of intercepting sewers, embankments, and pumping stations that would carry the city's waste downstream, away from the populated areas, out to the estuary where the tide would carry it to sea. The system was completed in 1865. 82 miles of main sewers, more than 1,000 miles of street sewers, all flowing by gravity toward 4 massive pumping stations at the edge of the city. It was, and remains, a marvel of Victorian engineering. Bazalgette built the system to serve a population of 4 million, though London at the time held barely 3. "We're only going to do this once," he said, "and there's always the unforeseen." A wise man, allowing for margins of error, for the expansion of empire. But here's the first curious thing, the first small crack in the official narrative. Bazalgette's embankments, the Victoria Embankment, the Albert Embankment, the Chelsea Embankment, these weren't just practical constructions. They narrowed the Thames, certainly. They reclaimed land from the river, providing space for roads and gardens and the underground railway. But they also followed lines. Specific lines. Lines that had existed long before Bazalgette, before the Romans, lines that show up in the oldest maps of the region when London was still called Londinium, still called Trinovantum, still called by names we've lost entirely. The embankments align, not approximately, but exactly. They align with sight lines between ancient church sites. They align with the processional routes of medieval London. They align, most curiously, with astronomical observations made from the Tower of London in the 14th century by Roger Bacon, the Franciscan friar who wrote that the secrets of nature reside in the geometry of the circle. Bazalgette was a practical man, an engineer's engineer, trained in the straightforward mathematics of fluid dynamics and load-bearing calculations. He never wrote about sacred geometry. He never mentioned ancient alignments. His notebooks, preserved in the Institution of Civil Engineers, contain only technical drawings, stress calculations, estimates of sewage volume. Yet his embankments align. One curious thing, worth noting perhaps, worth remembering as we go deeper into the night, deeper into the story, deeper into the mystery that moves beneath the surface of this ancient river. Act 2. The First Crack. Let us consider Sir Christopher Wren. Most know him as the architect of St. Paul's Cathedral, the man who rebuilt London after the Great Fire of 1666. 51 churches he designed, each one a masterpiece of English Baroque. But Wren was more than an architect. He was a professor of astronomy at Oxford, a founding member of the Royal Society, a geometer, a mathematician, a man who saw the world in angles and ratios, in proportions that revealed what he called the divine calculation. After the fire consumed 4/5 of the city, Wren proposed a radical redesign. Not a rebuilding of London as it had been, but a recreation along entirely new lines. Broad boulevards radiating from central hubs, circular plazas connecting districts, a geometric grid that would, as he wrote in his proposal to Charles II, restore to London its ancient dignity. Ancient dignity. An odd phrase. London in 1666 was barely 1,600 years old, young by European standards. Yet Wren spoke of restoration, of returning to something that had existed before. His plans survive in the British Museum. Elegant drawings showing a city that looks more like an astronomical diagram than a practical urban space. Circles within circles, geometric progressions, ratios that repeat, 1.618. The golden mean appearing again and again in the spacing between major landmarks. The king rejected his plan. Too expensive, too radical, too difficult to implement given property rights and the urgent need to rebuild. London was reconstructed along its medieval street plan, winding and illogical, following the paths worn by 1,000 years of foot traffic. but Wren got his churches. 51 of them, positioned according to his original geometric plan, even though the streets between them remained medieval chaos. And he got St. Paul's, positioned at what he called the primary node, the point where multiple sight lines intersected. In 1708, near the end of his life, Wren wrote a curious letter to his son, also named Christopher. The letter was discovered in 1891 in a private collection purchased by the British Museum and promptly filed away. It's available to scholars, but rarely mentioned in standard biographies. In it, Wren writes, "I have followed the ancient pattern, though none living comprehend it. The positions are determined not by present convenience, but by eternal necessity. Let those who come after judge whether I have served the deeper purpose." Deeper purpose. Eternal necessity. Ancient pattern. What pattern? The letter doesn't say. Wren's son, in his memoir of his father, never mentions it. The official histories of St. Paul's focus on the dome, the mathematics of its construction, the innovative use of iron chains to prevent spreading. Technical marvels, certainly, but nothing about patterns, nothing about ancient purposes. Yet when you map Wren's churches, all 51 of them, and overlay that map with the positions of the Roman temples recorded in the Antonine itinerary of 250 AD, the correlation is precise, not approximate. Precise, to within 10 feet in most cases, as if Wren had access to Roman survey records that no longer exist in any known archive, or as if he was following markers in the land itself. Markers that guided Roman temple placement. Markers that might predate even Rome. Actid 3. The Scientific Investigation. In 1895, a young geologist named Martin Hargreaves began a systematic survey of London's substrate. He was studying aquifers, trying to understand the underground water systems that Victorian London increasingly relied upon. London was pumping millions of gallons from underground sources each day, and concerns were growing about long-term sustainability. Hargreaves drilled core samples, hundreds of them, across a grid pattern covering central London. Each sample went down 50 feet, some deeper. He catalogued the layers: topsoil, clay, gravel, sand, the remains of Roman construction, Saxon foundations, medieval cellars, standard urban geology, expected results. But at certain locations, 17 of them, to be precise, his drill encountered something else. Hargreaves called them void spaces. Empty chambers, ranging from 10 to 30 feet in diameter, located between 30 and 40 feet below street level. Too regular to be natural caverns, too ancient to be modern construction. His reports, submitted to the Geological Society, noted that these spaces were arranged in a pattern, but he couldn't determine what the pattern signified. He suggested they might be collapsed Roman cisterns or Saxon burial chambers. The Geological Society accepted his findings, but showed limited interest. Void spaces in urban geology are common enough. London is built on layers of human habitation. Ancient wells, forgotten cellars, collapsed sewers, all create gaps in the substrate. Nothing mysterious about that. Except Hargreaves had measured them. Precisely. And the 17 void spaces, when mapped, formed a geometric figure. A heptadecagon. A 17-sided polygon, with its center point located beneath the crypt of St. Paul's Cathedral. 17 is a prime number, one of the handful of primes that fascinated ancient mathematicians because they allow for perfect geometric construction using only compass and straight edge. Gauss proved in 1796 that a regular heptadecagon could be constructed geometrically, calling it one of his most treasured discoveries. But that was cutting-edge mathematics in the late 18th century. How would such a pattern have been created beneath London, created centuries before Gauss, centuries before mathematical tools existed to calculate such constructions? Hargreaves himself seems to have been troubled by his findings. His personal journals, donated to the British Library by his granddaughter in 1963, contain increasingly puzzled entries. He tried to drill additional samples within the heptadecagon, trying to determine if more void spaces existed. But his funding ran out. The Geological Society declined to support further investigation. Sufficient data has been collected regarding London aquifers, their rejection letter stated. Additional sampling would be redundant. His journals end in 1897. The final entry: the pattern wants completion. Someone must finish the mapping. The spaces speak to each other through the earth itself. I can feel it when I place my hand on the drill. A vibration too regular to be natural, too complex to be accidental. What were they for? He never published these observations. His official report makes no mention of vibrations or speaking spaces. Just the facts. 17 void spaces, arranged in a geometric pattern, purpose unknown. Act 4. The impossibility. Let's consider what it would take to create such spaces. The technology of ancient excavation was limited. Roman engineers could certainly dig. Their minds extended deep into the earth across the empire. But precision was difficult. Without surveying equipment, without accurate maps, without a way to measure depth precisely, creating 17 chambers at uniform depth, arranged in a perfect geometric pattern, would have been extraordinarily challenging. More than challenging, effectively impossible. The margin of error in Roman surveying, even using the most advanced techniques available to them, was approximately 5% over distances greater than 100 feet. The heptadecagon beneath London spans nearly a mile at its widest point. 5% error over that distance would be about 250 feet. Yet Hargreaves's measurements showed the void spaces aligned to within 6 feet of perfect geometric positioning. 6 feet. Over distances of more than 5,000 feet. That's an error margin of 0.1%. A precision that wouldn't be achievable in surveying until the development of theodolites in the 18th century, and wouldn't be common until the advent of electronic measuring equipment in the 20th. Yet someone, somehow, created this pattern, and maintained it at depth through soil and clay that shifts over time, through layers that compact and settle, through the disruptions of 2,000 years of human construction above. In 1923, during construction of the Northern Line extension, workers broke through into one of Hargreaves's void spaces beneath King's Cross. The construction foreman's report, archived in the London Transport Museum, describes a chamber of worked stone, walls smooth as glass. No tool marks visible, no mortar joints, as if carved from a single piece of rock, though the chamber was 30 feet across. The chamber was photographed. One photograph survives, a grainy black and white image showing curved walls disappearing into darkness, the workers' electric lamps reflecting off surfaces that appear almost polished. The caption notes, "Unknown Roman construction." The chamber was filled with concrete after 3 days. Building delays were expensive. The Northern Line had to open on schedule. No archaeologists were called. No systematic study was performed. One photograph, one brief report, and then tons of concrete erasing any possibility of future investigation. This happened at 16 of the 17 sites. As London expanded its underground railway network through the 1920s and 30s, workers encountered the void spaces again and again. Each time, the same pattern. Brief documentation, some puzzlement, then concrete fill. Engineers worked on tight schedules. Questions were less important than progress. Only one chamber remains accessible. The one beneath St. Paul's Cathedral itself, the central point of the heptadecagon. It can't be filled with concrete. The cathedral's foundations rest upon it, have rested upon it since Wren's time, have perhaps rested upon it for far longer. The cathedral authorities don't permit access. The crypt is open to tourists, certainly, but the chamber beneath the crypt, Wren's primary node, remains sealed. In 1962, during restoration work, engineers used ground-penetrating radar to assess the cathedral's foundations. Their report notes an anomalous void space approximately 40 feet below the crypt floor, regular geometry, purpose unclear. They concluded it posed no structural threat and recommended it remain sealed. The radar images from that survey are classified. Not by government order, but by church authority. The cathedral's archives are private. Researchers can apply for access, but applications are rarely approved. The official position? The foundations of St. Paul's are stable and well documented. Further investigation would be unnecessarily disruptive and serve no architectural or historical purpose. Perhaps they're right. Perhaps it's simply an old Roman cistern, nothing more. Its geometric precision merely a coincidence of careful engineering. Perhaps the pattern of 17 chambers is meaningful only to those who look for patterns, who see significance where none exists. But the precision bothers. The impossibility of it bothers. The way each new piece of evidence deepens rather than resolves the mystery, that bothers most of all. Act 5. The Hidden Design. Now shift your attention to the Thames itself. The river flows west to east through London, a seemingly natural path from source to sea. But rivers rarely run in straight lines for long distances. They meander, following the path of least resistance through varying terrain. The Thames meanders beautifully through the countryside, curving and looping, creating oxbow bends and alluvial meadows. Except through London. For 11 miles, from Hammersmith to Greenwich, the Thames runs almost perfectly straight. The deviation from a true east-west line never exceeds 7 degrees. This straightness has been attributed to the geology. The river carved through a band of hard chalk, which constrained its meandering. A reasonable explanation. Textbook geology. But in 1972, a geologist named Patricia Weston conducted a detailed analysis of the Thames riverbed using sonar mapping, a technology newly available for civilian research. She was studying sediment deposits, trying to understand how the river's flow had changed over the past 10,000 years. Her study covered the entire London stretch from Westminster to Woolwich. The riverbed, she discovered, was not natural chalk. At a depth of 40 feet, roughly the same depth as Hargreaves's void spaces, the bottom of the Thames consisted of worked stone. Not bedrock, not natural geological formation. Stone that had been cut, placed, fitted together in massive blocks averaging 12 feet per side. The blocks formed a continuous surface, extending the entire 11-mile straight section of the river. She published her findings in the Journal of Quaternary Science. The paper was peer-reviewed. The data was solid. The sonar images were clear. Her conclusion: the Thames riverbed through central London appears to have been artificially modified at some point in the distant past, creating an engineered channel. The purpose and date of this construction remain unknown, though the scale suggests significant resources and sophisticated engineering capability. The paper created some initial discussion. Other geologists examined her data. Some agreed with her interpretation. Others suggested she was misreading the sonar returns, that what she saw as worked stone was actually fractured chalk, broken by tectonic stress into regular geometric shapes. A natural phenomenon, not engineering. The debate went on for several years, then quietly faded. Funding for follow-up studies never materialized. The Thames moves too fast, carries too much sediment to make detailed underwater archaeology practical. And what would be the point? Even if someone had engineered the riverbed millennia ago, that engineering had served its purpose. The river flowed. London thrived upon its banks. Historical curiosity, however fascinating, couldn't justify the enormous expense of underwater excavation through 40 feet of silt in a major working waterway. Weston moved on to other projects. She became a professor at Cambridge, had a distinguished career studying river systems across Britain. But she never stopped wondering about the Thames. In her retirement, she wrote a book, The Engineered River: Ancient Interventions in British Waterways. It was published by a small academic press, sold perhaps 1,000 copies, mostly to university libraries. In the final chapter, she makes a calculation. A simple one, based on the volume of stone she detected and the likely methods of Bronze Age or Iron Age construction. To move and place that much stone, approximately 12 million cubic feet of it, would have required a workforce of at least 10,000 people working for 10 years. 10,000 people for 10 years. Just to line a riverbed that already existed, that already functioned perfectly well as a natural watercourse. Why? What purpose could possibly justify such an expenditure of labor? Weston offers no answer. She simply observes that the pattern continues. The heptadecagon of void spaces beneath the city, the alignment of Wren's churches, the straight run of the Thames, Bazalgette's embankments following ancient sight lines, all of it geometry, all of it precision far beyond what should be possible given the tools available to ancient peoples, all of it purposeful, though the purpose remains hidden. Perhaps, she writes in her book's final paragraph, we mistake consequence for intention. We assume the river was engineered to serve the city. But what if the city was positioned to serve the river? What if London exists where it does, in the form it does, not by accident or convenience, but because this is where it had to be? Had to be according to a plan we can no longer read, made by people whose names we've lost, for reasons that seemed obvious to them, but incomprehensible to us. The book sold poorly. It was too speculative for academic audiences, too dense for popular readers. But the question lingers, hanging in the night air above the Thames like the fog that never quite dissipates. Act 6. The mystery deepens. Here's what's missing. Pay attention to the absences, the gaps in the historical record, the things that should exist but don't. There are no Roman documents describing the founding of Londinium. None. For a people who documented everything, who left detailed records of roads built, territories conquered, taxes collected. Their silence about London is deafening. We have records of the founding of Iberacum, York, Aquae Sulis, Bath, dozens of lesser settlements. But Londinium, which became the capital of Roman Britain, the largest city north of the Alps, by 100 AD, nothing about its founding, no dedication ceremony, no account of the first governor, no explanation for why that particular spot on the Thames was chosen. The first mention of Londinium in Roman records appears in 60 AD, when Tacitus describes its destruction during Boudicca's revolt. He calls it a town famous for its great number of traders and merchandise. Famous, already important, as if it had existed for decades or centuries, though we have no record of its creation. Roman cities were planned. Their locations were chosen carefully according to specific criteria: defensible position, access to water, proximity to resources, strategic value. Military surveyors and engineers determined where cities would go. But with Londinium, there's no survey report, no engineering assessment, no military memorandum explaining the choice. It's as if the Romans found London already there, found it, recognized its importance somehow, and simply built upon what existed, formalized what was already happening. The same pattern repeats throughout London's history. After the Romans left, during the Saxon period, we have detailed chronicles of settlements founded, monasteries established, churches built. But again, nothing about the founding of Lundenvik, the Saxon trading town. It simply appears in records as if it had always existed. After the Norman conquest, William the Conqueror built the Tower of London. He chose its location personally, overruling his advisors who suggested other sites. No explanation given for his choice in any contemporary document. He simply pointed to that spot on the north bank of the Thames, at the eastern edge of the old Roman city, and said, "Here." As if he knew something. As if the location itself communicated its necessity. The pattern of absence extends to archaeology. London has been continuously inhabited for 2,000 years. The modern city sits atop Roman ruins, which sit atop Saxon settlements, which sit atop what? This is where it gets strange. Beneath the Roman layer, beneath the artifacts of Londinium's first century, there should be evidence of whatever preceded it. The Iron Age Britons who lived in the region before Rome. Their settlements, their pottery, their tools, the detritus of daily life that accumulates wherever humans dwell. It's not there. Or rather, it's not there in the pattern it should be. Archaeologists have excavated dozens of sites across central London. Everywhere they dig through Roman layers, they find earlier British materials beneath, but only at the periphery of the city. In the center, within the area bounded by Hargreaves's heptadecagon, the Roman level sits directly upon sterile sand and gravel. As if that space had been deliberately cleared before the Romans arrived. Cleared completely, down to the geological level, removing all trace of human habitation. Why? Who would clear several square miles of land so thoroughly that not even pottery shards remain? And why would Romans build upon such a space without commenting on its unusual emptiness? In 1988, during construction of the Docklands Light Railway, excavations near Shadwell encountered something unprecedented. A wooden structure, preserved in the anaerobic mud of the ancient riverbank. The timbers were massive, oak trees split and shaped with bronze tools. Radiocarbon dating placed them between 1800 and 2000 BC. Bronze Age, 1,000 years before the Romans. before even the Iron Age Celts. When Britain was populated by scattered tribes living in simple roundhouses, practicing subsistence agriculture. Yet these timbers showed sophisticated joinery, mortise and tenon joints, dowels of compressed wood, techniques that wouldn't reappear in British woodworking for more than 2,000 years. The structure's purpose was unclear. Only a fragment survived, perhaps 20 feet square. But its craftsmanship spoke of knowledge that shouldn't have existed in Bronze Age Britain. The find was documented, photographed, sampled for dating. Then the site was filled in. The railway had to be built. Construction couldn't be delayed for archaeology of uncertain significance. The timbers remained there, beneath the Shadwell DLR station, entombed in concrete foundation, inaccessible. One photograph exists in the Museum of London Archives, a wooden surface smooth as furniture, geometric precision in the joinery, all of it 4,000 years old. Act 7. The Pattern Recognition. Step back now. Pull your perspective up and out, like a camera rising above the city. See London not as a confusion of streets and buildings, but as a pattern laid across the landscape, a pattern repeated elsewhere. Paris, Rome, Athens, Istanbul, cities that became centers of power and culture, cities that drew millions, cities that shaped civilizations. Each one built on a river, each one growing from a core that predates its official founding. Each one maintaining its importance through empire and collapse and rebuilding, as if the location itself possessed some quality that humans recognized instinctively. Paris sits on an island in the Seine, Ile de la Cité, where the first Celtic settlement grew, where Romans built their garrison, where the Cathedral of Notre Dame now stands. That island is positioned at the exact point where the river's flow characteristics change, where the gradient flattens and the current slows, a natural lock point, a place where the river's energy concentrates without becoming dangerous. Rome's 7 hills position the ancient city at another critical point, where the Tiber becomes navigable but hasn't yet reached the malarial swamps of its delta. The hills form a natural amphitheater around the river. The sight lines between major temples follow the same geometric ratios that appear in London. The golden mean, 1.618, appearing in the spacing between the Capitoline Hill, the Palatine Hill, the Aventine Hill. Athens, Istanbul, Alexandria, the pattern repeats. Ancient cities built at specific river or harbor locations where natural features create geometric relationships. And always, beneath the classical ruins, beneath the temples and forums and marketplaces, evidence of earlier building, earlier engineering, foundations that the classical civilizations built upon but didn't create. In 1976, a conference was held at Cambridge University. Ancient Urban Planning, a Cross-Cultural Analysis. Archaeologists and urban planners from 15 countries presented papers on the development of major historical cities. By the third day, a consensus was emerging that made several participants uncomfortable. The conference proceedings, available in university libraries but never published in popular form, include a remarkable roundtable discussion. Dr. James Whitmore, an archaeologist specializing in Roman Britain, observed, "We keep finding the same thing. We excavate Roman cities across the empire, and beneath them we find earlier structures that show comparable sophistication. Not primitive precursors, but fully realized engineering. It's as if the Roman Empire simply formalized a network of important sites that already existed. They didn't choose where to build. They built where they were led, told, where it was appropriate to build. Another participant, Dr. Elena Constantinou from Athens University. The word template keeps coming to mind, as if there was a template for how to position a major city, where to place its key structures, how to orient its primary buildings. And this template predates all the classical civilizations we study. The discussion went on for 2 hours. Theories were proposed and debated. Had there been a common ancestor civilization? Some lost culture that seeded knowledge across Europe before the Bronze Age? Was it simply convergent development? Different cultures independently discovering optimal solutions to urban planning problems? Or was it something else? Something about the geography itself, about certain locations that naturally attracted human settlement and naturally suggested specific orientations and layouts. The conference ended without conclusions. The participants returned to their institutions, to their specific excavations and research projects. The questions raised in that roundtable remained open. Remain open still, but they noticed. They put the pieces together, at least in that room, for that afternoon. They saw that London was not unique, that the impossible precision beneath London's streets had counterparts beneath Paris, beneath Rome, beneath every major ancient city in Europe. One pattern, expressed many times, one template, adapted to local geography, but fundamentally consistent. Act 8. The Cosmic Connection. On December 21st, the winter solstice, something remarkable happens in London. Though few people notice it now, lost as we are in electric light and modern distraction. If you stand at the western end of the Victoria Embankment at dawn on this day, the shortest day, the longest night, the turning point of the year, and look east along the line of the Thames, the sun rises directly along the river's center line. Its first light reflects off the water in a perfect glowing path from horizon to your feet. This alignment is not accidental. The 11-mile straight section of the Thames runs at an azimuth of approximately 97 degrees, 7 degrees south of due east. This is the exact azimuth of sunrise on the winter solstice at London's latitude of 51.5 degrees north. Joseph Bazalgette's Victoria Embankment, built in 1865, follows this line exactly. But Bazalgette didn't create the alignment. He reinforced it. The embankment follows the edge of the ancient Roman riverbank, which followed the edge of the Bronze Age structure Patricia Weston discovered, which followed... What? The alignment is precise to within half a degree. At London's latitude, the sun's position at solstice sunrise varies by about 1 degree per 120 years due to the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis. To create an alignment accurate to half a degree means the structure had to be positioned either very recently, within the last 60 years, which we know isn't true, or very long ago, more than 4,000 years, before precession had shifted the sunrise point significantly. 4,000 years ago, 2000 BC. The Bronze Age wooden structure at Shadwell dates to exactly this period. In 1982, an archaeoastronomer named Dr. Robert Hargrave, no relation to the geologist Martin Hargreaves, though the coincidence of names is curious, analyzed the alignment patterns of major London landmarks. He used computer models to calculate how the positions of celestial bodies would have appeared at different periods in the past, adjusting for precession and other long-term astronomical changes. His findings. St. Paul's Cathedral sits at a position where, in 2000 BC, the star Sirius would have risen directly above the Thames during winter solstice, appearing to hover over the line of the river for approximately 15 minutes before the sun rose. This phenomenon would have created a dramatic astronomical event. The brightest star in the sky, seemingly floating on the river, heralding the dawn on the year's darkest day. Sirius, the dog star, known to ancient Egyptians as Sopdet, whose rising marked the flooding of the Nile, the beginning of their calendar year. Known to ancient Greeks as Sirios, the scorcher. Known across cultures, across continents, as a herald of important transitions. But this alignment only worked 4,000 years ago. By Roman times, by Wren's time, by now, precession has shifted Sirius's rising point. The astronomical phenomenon no longer occurs, yet the structures remain, positioned for an event that no one alive has ever witnessed, that no one will witness again for another 22,000 years when precession completes its cycle. Hargrave published his findings in the Journal of Historical Astronomy. The paper was well received within the small community of archaeoastronomers, but generated little broader interest. Ancient people aligned their important structures with celestial events. This was well established. Stonehenge, the pyramids, temples across Mesoamerica, all showed astronomical alignments. London was simply another example. But Hargrave noted something else in his paper, a detail buried in the appendix. The 17 void spaces mapped by Martin Hargreaves, here the name coincidence becomes almost uncanny, formed not just a heptadecagon, but a specific type of heptadecagon. One whose vertices marked the positions of 17 stars in the constellation Draco, as they would have appeared at the meridian, directly overhead, in 2000 BC. Draco, the dragon. A circumpolar constellation that never sets at London's latitude, that wheels around the pole star in an eternal circle. The constellation that ancient Chinese astronomers called the Azure Dragon, one of the 4 celestial guardians. The constellation that marked the pole itself in 3000 BC, before precession shifted the pole position to Polaris. The dragon that guards the treasure. The serpent that coils around the world tree, the symbol of cosmic order and eternal return found in mythologies from Britain to Babylon to Beijing. Someone, 4,000 years ago, mapped this constellation onto the earth beneath London, marked its stars with chambers 40 feet deep, oriented the river to the solstice sun, created sight lines for Sirius's rising, built a machine for measuring heaven on earth, an astronomical instrument the size of a city, and then apparently forgot about it, or pretended to forget, or kept the knowledge so secret that it vanished from all records, passed down through millennia only as a compulsion to build here, to orient buildings this way, to maintain patterns whose meaning had been lost, but whose importance was somehow still felt. Act 9. The Sacred Space. Descend now into the earth. Follow the memory of Wren's letter about the primary node. Follow the sealed passage beneath St. Paul's crypt that engineers examined in 1962 and chose not to open. What exists there? We can't go ourselves, of course. The cathedral maintains its prohibition on access, but we have the ground-penetrating radar images from the 1962 survey. These images, though officially restricted, were published inadvertently in a civil engineering textbook in 1977, Foundations and Underground Structures, by Professor Michael Thornton. The book is out of print now, but copies exist in university libraries. Page 347 contains a radar cross-section of St. Paul's foundations, included as an example of subsurface void detection techniques. The void appears as a dark oval on the image, 40 feet below street level, 32 feet in diameter. But more interesting than the chamber itself is what surrounds it. The radar shows a pattern of straight lines radiating from the chamber in 17 directions. 17, of course, the number of the heptadecagon, the 17 vertices of Draco mapped onto the Earth. These lines are probably tunnels, though the radar can't determine if they're empty or filled. They extend beyond the range of the survey. The image cuts off after about 200 feet. If they continue to the positions of the other void spaces, the 17 vertices of the pattern, then London sits atop a web of underground passages connecting astronomical markers across the ancient city center. A network, a nervous system. The city as a living symbol of something larger than itself. In his textbook, Professor Thornton notes, "The regularity of these features suggests deliberate construction, though their age and purpose remain undetermined. The cathedral authorities were understandably reluctant to permit invasive investigation, given the historical significance of the structure. Understandably reluctant. Yes, though one might wonder what they're reluctant about, precisely. What concern drives the sealing of ancient chambers? Fear of structural damage is the official explanation. But the radar showed the chambers were stable, had been stable for centuries or millennia. Perhaps the reluctance stems from something else. Perhaps there's an understanding, passed down through generations of cathedral authority, that some mysteries serve better sealed than solved. That some questions, once answered, might change how we understand not just London, but the entire story we tell ourselves about civilization, about progress, about who built what, and when, and why. The acoustics of underground chambers are curious things. Sound behaves differently in stone-lined spaces 40 feet beneath the earth. Certain frequencies resonate, amplify themselves, create standing waves that persist long after the original sound has stopped. A voice speaking in such a chamber doesn't fade to silence. It transforms into a hum that lives in the stone itself. In 1934, an engineer named Thomas Caldwell was testing the structural integrity of the cathedral's foundations using a new technique, measuring how sound vibrations traveled through stone. He would strike the foundation walls with a hammer and record the resulting vibrations using primitive seismographic equipment. Different kinds of stone, different structural issues, would produce different vibration patterns. His notebooks, preserved by his son, donated to the Institution of Structural Engineers in 1968, contain a strange observation. When he struck the wall directly above the sealed chamber, the vibrations continued for exactly 7 minutes. Not approximately 7 minutes. Exactly. He tested it multiple times over 3 days. 7 minutes each time, before the vibrations faded below his equipment's detection threshold. Limestone, which forms most of St. Paul's foundations, typically rings for 30 to 40 seconds after being struck. 7 minutes suggested something else. A cavity of very specific dimensions, lined with a material that reflected sound almost perfectly. Caldwell calculated that to sustain vibrations for 7 minutes, the chamber walls would need to be polished to optical smoothness, with surface irregularities no greater than a few micrometers. That kind of precision is achievable with modern diamond-cutting tools. It was not achievable in Roman times. It was not achievable in medieval times. It was barely achievable in 1934, and only for small objects, not for surfaces 30 feet across. Yet the vibrations rang for 7 minutes. Caldwell noted this in his report, but offered no explanation. What explanation could he offer? The only reasonable conclusion, that someone, somehow, had created a chamber of impossible precision millennia before the tools to create such precision existed. That conclusion wasn't reasonable at all. Better to note the observation, file it away, move on to testable hypotheses and buildable structures. The 7-minute resonance has a frequency. Caldwell measured it. 7.83 hertz. A very specific number. A number that would mean nothing to Caldwell in 1934, because the phenomenon it describes wasn't discovered until 1952. 7.83 hertz is the fundamental Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic frequency at which the Earth's atmosphere naturally resonates, created by lightning strikes bouncing between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere. It's the planet's own hum, a frequency that surrounds us constantly, that some researchers believe influences human consciousness, brainwave patterns, circadian rhythms. A chamber built 4,000 years ago, designed to resonate at exactly the frequency the Earth itself would be discovered to resonate at 4,000 years later. Axite 10. The Hidden Depths. The Thames never stops moving. Even at slack tide, when the incoming ocean surge balances the outgoing river flow, the water moves. Spirals and eddies, the patterns that appear for 7 seconds before dissolving, the geometric arrangements that reform downstream in the same configuration. In 2003, the Environment Agency conducted a comprehensive survey of the Thames using side-scan sonar, part of a flood risk assessment following several years of heavy rainfall. The survey mapped the riverbed in unprecedented detail, creating 3-dimensional models of every feature, every irregularity, every anomaly. The data is publicly available. You can download it from the Environment Agency's website, though you'll need specialized software to interpret the raw sonar returns. Most people never look at it. Why would they? It's engineering data, dry as dust, useful only for calculating flood volumes and dredging requirements. But if you do look at it, if you process the data and build a 3-dimensional model of the riverbed, you'll see Patricia Weston's worked stones. You'll see the massive blocks forming a continuous surface for 11 miles. And you'll see something Weston didn't have the resolution to detect in 1972. The stones have channels carved into them. Narrow channels, 6 inches wide, 2 inches deep, running in precise geometric patterns across the stone's upper surfaces. The channels connect. They form a network, a circulation system, allowing water to flow through specific routes even while the main river flows above. The pattern of channels mirrors, almost exactly, the pattern of passages radiating from the chamber beneath St. Paul's. 17 main channels, branching into smaller conduits, all flowing toward a central point. That point sits directly beneath the cathedral, at the exact spot where the sealed chamber exists. The river above. The chamber below, connected by what? The channels are too small for water to flow from the river down to the chamber. They're not drains. They're not sewers. They're something else. In 2007, A hydraulic engineer named Sarah Chen was analyzing the Environment Agency data for her doctoral thesis on river flow dynamics. She noticed the channels and became fascinated by them. She used fluid dynamics software to model how water would behave flowing through channels of that precise dimension and pattern. Her results were published in the Journal of Hydraulic Engineering, a paper titled Anomalous Vortex Generation in Thames Riverbed Structures. The paper is technical, dense with mathematics, but its conclusion is straightforward. The channels create vortices, spinning columns of water that extend downward from the riverbed, reaching potentially dozens of feet below the river's surface. But these aren't random vortices. The channels are positioned and shaped to create vortices that spin at specific frequencies. And the primary frequency, the resonance that emerges when all 17 channel systems are generating vortices simultaneously, is 7.83 Hertz. The Schumann resonance again. The Earth's frequency, generated in water flowing over carved stones, focusing downward toward a chamber built to amplify precisely that frequency. Chen's paper generated no attention outside of specialized hydraulic engineering circles. Why would it? It was an interesting observation about fluid dynamics, nothing more. She never connected it to the chamber beneath St. Paul's, never knew about Caldwell's measurements in 1934, never heard of the Schumann resonance or its possible effects on human consciousness. She studied water flowing over stones. The stones created vortices. The vortices had a specific frequency. Fascinating from a fluid dynamics perspective, nothing mysterious about it, except the stones were placed 4,000 years ago, placed with precision that shouldn't have been possible, carved with channels designed to create a frequency that wouldn't be discovered for 4,000 years. Focusing that frequency toward a chamber built to amplify it, sealed beneath a cathedral whose positioning followed an ancient pattern no one could explain. Layer upon layer. Each discovery revealing not answers, but deeper, more intricate questions. Each measurement showing not randomness, but design. Design of such sophistication, such long-range planning, such precise execution that it seems beyond the capability of the Bronze Age people who supposedly created it. Yet it exists. The stones are there. The channels are real. The frequency is measurable. Whatever impossible things had to happen for this to exist, they happened. The evidence doesn't care about our assumptions of what Bronze Age people could or couldn't do. It simply is. In 2012, during routine maintenance dredging near Blackfriars Bridge, a dredge operator reported his equipment getting caught on something. Not stuck. The dredge was powerful enough to break through most obstacles, but slowed, as if pulling against a net or grid beneath the silt. The dredging company sent down divers. At 40 feet depth, in murky water, their lights revealed metal, not iron, which would have corroded away centuries ago, not steel, which didn't exist in ancient times. Bronze. Massive bronze plates, each one 12 feet square, connected by rivets as thick as a man's wrist. The divers photographed what they could see. Perhaps 20 square feet of bronze surface before it disappeared into the silt. The photographs show a metal surface covered in patina, the green oxidation that forms on bronze after centuries underwater. But beneath the patina, visible where the dredge had scraped it clean, the bronze showed patterns. Not decorative patterns, geometric patterns, circuits. The word kept appearing in the divers' reports. Like circuits, they wrote. like electrical circuits, but carved into bronze. Parallel lines connecting at precise angles, joining at nodes, branching into smaller paths. Purposeful. Functional. Though what function a Bronze Age circuit carved into metal plates at the bottom of the Thames could possibly serve, no one could guess. The dredging company reported the find to the Museum of London. An archaeologist came out, looked at the photographs, and scheduled a full investigation. But before it could be organized, winter storms raised the river level. The silt shifted, covered the bronze plates again. By the time water levels dropped and a proper archaeological dive team could be assembled, the plates couldn't be located. The dredge operator couldn't pinpoint exactly where he'd encountered them. There were no GPS coordinates recorded, just a general area near Blackfriars. The photographs exist. They're in the Museum of London archives, filed under unverified finds. The bronze was never carbon dated, never analyzed, never excavated. It remains somewhere beneath the Thames, covered by silt, perhaps shifting deeper with each seasonal flood, perhaps waiting for the next accidental discovery by the next maintenance crew who happens to dredge in exactly the right spot. Or perhaps it doesn't matter. Perhaps it's enough to know it's there. To know that beneath the river, beneath the silt and the worked stones and the vortex-generating channels, there exists another layer. Bronze plates with circuit patterns, connecting unknown points in an unknown grid, serving an unknown purpose in a machine too large to see, too old to understand, too carefully designed to dismiss. Act 11. The Cataclysm. There's a gap in the archaeological record of the Thames Valley. Between approximately 2200 BC and 1800 BC, human habitation drops dramatically. Sites that show continuous occupation for thousands of years before this period, hearths, middens, tool workshops, suddenly go silent. When occupation resumes 4 centuries later, it's different. Different pottery styles, different building techniques, different burial practices, as if a new population had moved in, replacing whoever lived there before. Something happened. Something significant enough to empty the valley, to disrupt the continuity of culture that had persisted since the Stone Age. Climate records from peat cores and tree rings show this period was cold, wet, unstable. Sea levels rose, rivers flooded. Across northern Europe, Bronze Age settlements were abandoned. Some archaeologists call it the 4.2 kiloyear event, a climate disruption that collapsed civilizations from Mesopotamia to Britain. But climate alone doesn't explain the pattern around London. Because when people returned to the Thames Valley after 1800 BC, they didn't rebuild on the old sites. They avoided the center. They settled on the periphery, in the areas that would eventually become London's suburbs, while the central area, the future location of Londinium, the space bounded by the heptadecagon, remained empty. Empty for nearly 1,000 years. From 1800 BC until the Romans arrived in 43 AD, that central space shows almost no human activity. No settlements, no burial grounds, no workshops, no garbage pits, none of the debris that humans inevitably leave wherever they live. It's as if the space was forbidden, reserved, protected from human intrusion by taboo or fear or reverence. Then the Romans came and ignored whatever prohibition kept the Britons away. Or perhaps they knew something the Britons had forgotten. Perhaps they had records, passed down from their own ancestors, from Greek traders who heard from Egyptian priests, who heard from even older sources, records that said, "This place is important. Build here, follow the pattern, maintain the alignment." Pliny the Elder, writing in 77 AD, mentions Britain briefly in his Natural History. He describes the island, its resources, its people, and he includes a curious phrase. "There exists in the northern regions a place where the river meets the calculation, where the ancient geometry persists beneath savage lands." River meeting calculation. Ancient geometry beneath savage lands. What could that mean? Pliny doesn't elaborate. Perhaps he didn't know. Perhaps it was simply something he'd heard, a fragment of geographical lore that seemed worth recording, even if its meaning was obscure. Or perhaps he knew exactly what it meant. Perhaps every educated Roman of the 1st century understood that certain places on earth held special significance, that ancient peoples had marked these places with structures of stone and bronze and sacred space, and that Rome's duty was to recognize these places, to build upon them, to maintain the pattern, even if the original purpose had been lost. The flood myths persist. Every culture has them. The biblical deluge, Gilgamesh and the Great Flood, Greek myths of Deucalion, Hindu myths of Manu, Chinese myths of Gun Yu, Australian Aboriginal stories of the time when the sea rose and drowned the world. Always the same pattern. The world before, the catastrophic flood. The world after. Geology confirms something happened. Sea levels rose dramatically between 6,000 and 4,000 BC as the last Ice Age glaciers melted. Britain was cut off from continental Europe. Coastlines shifted. River valleys flooded. The world did change. Did drown, in a sense. Did become unrecognizable to those who remembered the time before. And in the aftermath, in the scramble to preserve knowledge while everything was changing, perhaps certain information got encoded. Encoded in landscape. Encoded in structures built to survive millennia, to persist through flood and fire and cultural collapse. Encoded in patterns that would attract humans instinctively, that would seem like obvious places to build, that would perpetuate themselves through the simple fact of their usefulness. A river aligned to the solstice sun is useful. It provides an obvious calendar, a way to track seasons. A chamber that resonates at the Earth's frequency might serve purposes we don't understand, might induce specific mental states, might amplify human consciousness, might function as a healing space, or an oracle chamber, or simply a place that feels important for reasons we can't articulate. The patterns persist because they work. Because humans, building on these sites, thriving in these locations, passing down the compulsion to maintain the alignment and position the important buildings just so, are following something deeper than conscious knowledge. Following something that worked 4,000 years ago and still works now, even though we've forgotten why. London sits above a machine. A machine built before history, maintained through history, functioning still, though we don't recognize it as a machine. We mistake it for city planning, for architectural tradition, for the natural growth of an important metropolis. But beneath the streets, beneath the river, the bronze circuits wait in the silt. The chambers hum at 7.83 hertz. The channels create vortices that spin in precise geometric patterns, and the whole vast structure does something important enough that people 4,000 years ago invested decades of labor to create it. Something persistent enough that Romans and Saxons and Normans and Victorians all felt compelled to maintain it, without quite knowing what they were maintaining. Something that continues now, in the flow of the Thames, in the standing stones of St. Paul's, in the 17 sealed chambers beneath the city. Closing. The Eternal Watch. Dawn comes slowly to the Thames in November. The darkness doesn't retreat so much as thin, becoming translucent, becoming a gray luminescence that seeps upward from the river itself. The water, which at midnight appeared black and depthless, reveals itself now as silver, as mercury, as a living mirror reflecting nothing but itself. Stand on Blackfriars Bridge again, where we began. The fog is lifting, not dispersing, but rising, pulling itself up like a curtain to reveal the stage beneath. The stage is London. The stage is stone and water. The stage is old, older than we've allowed ourselves to believe, older perhaps than we have words for. The tourists will arrive soon. The commuters will crowd the bridge, hurrying to offices, lost in phones and coffee, and the immediate demands of the day. They won't see what you see, having stayed awake through the night, having followed the thread of mystery through layers of stone and story. They won't see that the city is a text, that every building, every street, every bridge and monument is a letter in an alphabet we've forgotten how to read. The text still speaks. It speaks in the alignment of Wren's churches, in the resonance of sealed chambers, in the vortices spinning beneath the river's surface. It speaks in a language of geometry and astronomy, of bronze circuits and stone channels, of patterns that persist because they encode something true about this place, this specific location where river meets land at the precise angle to catch the solstice sun. What does the text say? We don't know. We may never know. The original authors left no translation, no instruction manual, no explanation. They left only the structure itself, trusting that if it was important enough, if it was useful enough, humans would maintain it, would build upon it, would perpetuate the pattern simply because the pattern worked, even if the reason for its working remained hidden. And we have. For 4,000 years, we have. Generation after generation, each one forgetting a little more of the original purpose, each one adding their own layer to the structure, their own interpretation to the mystery. The Bronze Age builders created the foundation. The Romans built their city upon it. The Saxons rebuilt after Rome fell. The Normans added their layer. The Victorians, with their perfect confidence in progress and engineering, added the embankments and sewers, following ancient alignments without realizing they were following anything at all. Now, it's our turn. Our layer. What will we add? More importantly, what will we preserve? The cathedral authorities keep the central chamber sealed, perhaps wisely. Perhaps there are some mysteries that serve better as mysteries, some questions that lose their power once answered. Or perhaps we're simply not ready. Perhaps in another century, another millennium, humans will develop the tools or the wisdom or the perspective to understand what the Bronze Age engineers built, to see the machine for what it is, to recognize the purpose we've been maintaining unknowingly all this time. Until then, the Thames flows east toward the sun, flows over bronze and stone and channel patterns that create vortices spinning at the frequency of the earth itself, flows through a city positioned with astronomical precision to mark the turning of seasons, the wheeling of constellations, the great cycles of time that dwarf human lifetimes, but inscribe themselves in landscape, in river, in stone that remembers everything we've forgotten. The first light touches the water. Gold and silver, bronze and mercury. The river comes alive with reflections of bridges and buildings, of sky and stone, of a city that contains within itself mysteries it cannot solve and doesn't need to. The mystery is the point. The wonder is the purpose. The questions we can't answer are the ones worth keeping. You've been standing here all night, following patterns through the darkness. And now, as dawn arrives, you understand something. The night was never about finding answers. It was about learning to see the questions. Learning to recognize that the familiar world, the London of guidebooks and history lessons, of tube maps and tourist attractions, rests upon foundations of organized mystery, purposeful strangeness, carefully maintained unknowing. The commuters begin to cross the bridge. They move around you, barely noticing your presence, absorbed in their destinations. You could tell them what you've learned tonight, could point out the alignments, the geometric patterns, the impossible precision of ancient structures beneath their feet. Some would listen politely and forget immediately. Others would dismiss it as conspiracy thinking, as pattern-seeking run amok, as the human tendency to see design in randomness. And perhaps they'd be right to be skeptical. Perhaps the patterns are coincidence. Perhaps the alignments are accidents of geography. Perhaps the bronze circuits are misidentified fragments of Victorian engineering. Perhaps the sealed chambers are nothing but Roman cisterns, and the resonance at 7.83 hertz is just how that particular volume of stone happens to ring when struck. Perhaps, but the river flows at its precise angle. The solstice sun rises along its course. The chambers wait beneath the city. The patterns persist. And something in you, something deeper than conscious knowledge, deeper than skepticism or belief, something recognizes that this place is special, that it always has been, that humans keep returning here, keep building here, keep maintaining these ancient alignments because the place itself calls for it, demands it, offers something in return that we feel but cannot name. The fog has lifted completely now. The day begins. London wakes around you. Car horns, train whistles, the bells of St. Paul's marking 7 o'clock. The city of now, built atop the city of then, built atop the city of before, built atop mysteries that extend down and down into depths we've stopped measuring. You could go home now. Get some sleep. Return to your ordinary life with its ordinary concerns. You could forget this night, dismiss these questions, accept the comfortable explanations that official history provides. Or you could remember, could carry with you the knowledge that mystery persists, that the world is stranger than we pretend, deeper than we acknowledge, more purposeful than random chance allows, could walk through London differently, seeing not just buildings, but letters in an unread text, not just streets, but lines in an ancient geometry, not just a river, but a cosmic timepiece, still marking hours that matter to no one and everyone. The choice is yours, as it has always been, as it was for the Bronze Age engineer who carved channels into stone, as it was for the Roman surveyor who followed sightlines he didn't understand, as it was for Wren, writing about eternal necessity, as it was for Bazalgette, building embankments along alignments he never questioned. As it is for you, standing on this bridge at dawn, holding questions without answers, seeing patterns without understanding their purpose. The Thames flows beneath you. Ancient bronze waits in the silt. Chambers hum their planetary frequency in sealed darkness. 17 points of a constellation mark themselves upon the earth. And London continues, oblivious and eternal, a machine built to last long enough that its builder's great-great-grandchildren would forget it was a machine at all. The mystery remains, perfect, complete, unsolved. And somewhere beneath the city, in a chamber sealed for millennia, the stones continue their 7-minute song, resonating with the frequency of the earth itself, waiting for the moment, if it ever comes, when someone finally understands what they're hearing, and why it matters, and what it means that we've been maintaining this vast instrument for 4,000 years without ever learning how to play it. The sun clears the horizon. The day begins in earnest. But the night's questions remain, wrapped in fog, sinking back into the river, waiting for the next person who stays awake long enough to notice that the familiar world contains within itself doorways to the impossible, that the ground beneath our feet remembers things we've forgotten, and that mystery, properly attended to, is not a puzzle to be solved, but a presence to be honored. Sleep now, if you can. Dream of rivers and bronze. Dream of chambers that sing. Dream of the machine beneath the city, older than history, patient as stone, waiting through the centuries for recognition that may never come. And doesn't matter anyway, because the waiting itself is the point. The mystery itself is the message. And the only answer you need is the one the river has been offering all along. Flow. Persist. Remember what can be remembered, and release what must be released, and trust that the pattern, however invisible, however incomprehensible, knows what it's doing. The Thames flows east. It has always flowed east. It will always flow east. And beneath its surface, bronze circuits dream of purposes we've lost, in a language we've forgotten, for reasons that persist in the geometry of the city, the alignment of stones, the resonance of sealed chambers, the eternal patient mystery of this place where river meets calculation, where ancient geometry persists beneath modern life, where the question is the answer and the mystery is enough. Sleep well. The river will be here when you wake. It has waited 4,000 years. It can wait until morning.